So good afternoon again, and welcome to the Beijing Center for Chinese Studies, TBC. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Dr. Simon Koo, our Executive Director. My name is Brendan Gottschall. I'm a Jesuit scholastic working here for my Regency as a research associate. And it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our guest this afternoon, although I suspect for most of us he needs no introduction. Father Antonio Spadaro of the Society of Jesus is editor-in-chief of La Civiltà Cattolica, a bi-monthly review of culture, thought, and civilization. He holds a degree in philosophy from the University of Messina and a doctorate in theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University, where he is taught as invited professor in the Faculty of Theology. Father Spadaro is a prolific author, having published on a wide variety of topics, including literary criticism, theological criticism, in dialogue with the contemporary culture. He is also the author of the first ever conversation book with Pope Francis, entitled A Conversation on Faith, Hope, and the Church in a Time of Change, and has worked closely with the Holy Father on a number of other projects. As a Jesuit in the tradition of Matteo Ricci, Father Spadaro is called to be a minister of reconciliation, and one of the ways he exercises this ministry is by thinking and writing about the current global political situation, with a particular focus on China. As such, in collaboration with Georgetown University, my alma mater, he co-founded the China Forum for Civilization Dialogue. This afternoon, he will talk to us a bit about the role of China and the Catholic Church in creating a just and peaceful global order based on encounter, trust, and friendship. In this sense, he is truly a prophetic voice. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Father Spadaro to Beijing and to the Beijing Center.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for being here, for listening. My humble voice about China here in China, Beijing. I feel very privileged to be here, and I'm in China for the first time. So I'm getting a lot of experiences here, and I hope to come back soon, of course. But I want to share with you just some thoughts about what I think on the topic of this meeting. So seeking harmony in a global age, toward a culture of encounter. And as you know, Pope Francis uses many times the expression culture of encounter, which is extremely important for him. It's even the meaning itself of the pontificate. So in February 2018, when the 4,000 edition of La Civiltà Cattolica was published, because Civiltà Cattolica was founded in 1850, so it's one of the oldest review in the world. Pope Francis, in a special audience in the Vatican, recommended to our journal, as an example to follow, a man who loved China totally, Matteo Ricci, Lima Du, as he was known in China. This Jesuit, who transferred to China when he was 30 years old, made a great mappa mundi, a map of the world, depicting the continents and the island then known. In this way, the Chinese could see far distant lands in a new way, and they were named and briefly described. Ricci broke up the Eurocentrism of his audience and showed the reality of China and the need for spreading the Gospel's message. His Mappa Mundi was used to create connections between Western civilizations and the Chinese people. The Mappa Mundi, in fact, was a bridge connecting lands, cultures, and civilizations that are under the same sky. In a divided world such as our own, in a world of walls and obstacles, the ideal of harmony and of a land in peace is very inspirational. Harmony is also a term we use in music. President Xi, quoting Yang Zi, Prime Minister of Qi, a contemporary of Confucius, used the image of music that combines length, rhythm, feeling, tone, style. He said, "Who could tolerate the same tone being played continually by a single instrument?" Hence his conclusion. Today we live in a world with different cultures, ethnic groups, skin colors, religions, and social systems, and all the peoples on the face of the earth have become members of a community that is intimately united and shares the same destiny. President Xi talked also about the great Asian civilizations in his speech at the opening ceremony of the Conference on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations on May 15, 2019. He said that the great Asian civilizations, quote, have a special place in the annals of world civilizations, and they have added to the diversity of human civilizations. Think of what Asia stands to offer in terms of religion, philosophy, ethic code, law, literature, painting, drama, music, and even the building of towns and villages. In an address to UNESCO in 2014, the President Xi used also a beautiful image, the one of many colors, to describe the, quote, magnificent genetic map of the path of human civilizations on the earth, end of quote. And he added that the palette of colors of the various civilizations is enriched by, quote, greater exchanges and reciprocal learning, end of quote, offering prospects for the future. That talk was diametrically opposed to the so-called clash of civilizations. In the Conference of Dialogue of Asian Civilizations, President Xi also said civilizations don't have to clash with each other. What is needed are eyes to see the beauty in all civilizations. We should keep our own civilizations dynamic and create conditions for other civilizations to flourish. Together we can make the garden of world civilizations colorful and vibrant, end of quote. Pope Francis, too, used the image of the palette of colors and proposed the civilization of encounter as an alternative to uncivilized clash. We also recall how Pope Francis stated in his interview with Professor Francesco Sicci from Renmin University, published by Asia Times in February 2016, quote, "The Western world, the Eastern world, and China each have the ability to maintain an equilibrium of peace and the strength to do so," end of quote. This is Pope Francis. So this kind of equilibrium is not the fruit of a compromise and division, but it's a fruit of dialogue. We need dialogue. We live in a world that is constantly becoming more global. History today must help us to understand that globalization does not coincide at all with westernization of the world, but must be framed within a broader perspective. The interdependence between peoples, cultures, and nations of the world is a characteristic reality of the time in which we live and is projected as an essential dimension of the future world. Contributing to reconciliation and justice in the present and in the future presupposes first recognizing the richness that the cultural diversity of our world means, and second, ensuring the just participation of every cultural expression in the multicultural phase of universal humanity. So President Xi, in a speech on Dialogue of Asian Civilizations, said, no civilization is superior over others. The thought that one's own race and civilization are superior and the inclination to remold or replace other civilizations are just stupid. To act them out will only bring catastrophic consequences. If human civilizations are reduced to only one single color or one single model, the world would become a stereotype and too dull a place to live in. What we need is to respect each other as equals and say no to hubris and prejudice. We need to deepen understanding of the difference between one's own civilization and others, and work to promote interaction, dialogue, and harmony among civilizations. End of quote. In the document of human fraternity co-signed in Abu Dhabi last February by Pope Francis and the Imam of Al-Azhar, they wrote together that we are called, quote, to work to defend the values of mutual understanding, human fraternity, and harmonious coexistence, to re-establish wisdom, justice, and love in this world. End of quote. They wrote also that, quote, it's important to pay attention to religious, cultural, and historical differences that are a vital component in shaping the character, culture, and civilization. End of quote. So they use the same framework and even the same word. President Xi and Pope Francis, together with the Imam of Al-Azhar. It's interesting to understand well the framework in which they, inside of which they see the world and the dynamics which are active in the world today and what we need, which means dialogue among differences. Even when we speak of the Christian faith in a global context, whether it be 500 years ago or today, we are faced with an ever-fluid tension between the globality of its claims and the myriad cultural realities that define it locally over time and that provide the context. Its peculiar and fundamental globality prevents the Church from forging preferential links with one area of the world at the expenses of others, or with one civilization at the expense of others. In particular, this universality pushes the Holy See, the Vatican, to nurture no distrust or hostility toward any country, but to follow the way of dialogue in order to reduce distances, overcome misunderstandings, and avoid new divisions. A look at the current world tells us that without reckoning with everything that China represents today, it's not possible to advance in reconciliation among the peoples of the world. Even less without the conscious and active participation of the Chinese people, it will be possible to achieve the planet's sustainable ecological balance and to achieve the goals of the United Nations in terms of overcoming poverty and human development. It's not possible. The Secretary of State of the Holy See, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, is concerned about divisions and conflicts that pervade the globalized world. In a preface of a book about the Church in China I recently edited, he wrote that, quote, the Holy See hopes to be able to collaborate with China to promote peace, to address the serious environmental issues of our time, to facilitate the encounter of cultures, and to advance the good of humanity. End of quote. And he himself, in an interview to Global Times, published last May, he said, sophisticated international entities like China and the Apostolic See may become even more aware of a common responsibility for the grave problems of our time. Global responses have to correspond to global challenges. Catholicism, by its nature, is a global reality, able to promote in an original way the search for meaning and happiness, to bolster the value of belonging to a specific culture, and at the same time experience universal fraternity. End of quote. This was the interview that Cardinal Parolin gave to Global Times. Among the global challenges which need to be faced with a spirit of positive cooperation is the great issue, but it's just an example, the great issue of environmental and climatic emergencies. We know that we need to bring our imaginations to developing new frameworks, new way of thinking and addressing the challenges to our environment. So the two global leaders, President Xi and Pope Francis, independently brought forth a new framework, a new way of imagining responses to the challenge. In his report to the 19th CPC Congress, President Xi articulated his call for the development of an ecological civilization, affirming, quote, "We will step up efforts to establish a legal and policy framework that promotes a sound economic structure that facilitates green, low-carbon, and circular development." Pope Francis, in his letter addressed to the world called Laudato Si', introduced a set of reflection focused, quote, on care for our common home. Pope Francis urges us to, quote, adopt a circular model of production capable of preserving resources for present and future generation, end of quote. Again, the same words. What these two leaders offer us is a new way of imagining, a new way of thinking, a new way of framing our responsibilities to our environment, to one another, and to future generations. It is a vision based on a circular view, one that brings people and the environment into harmony and balance. But we must be aware not just of the deep challenges of today, globalization, but also of the deep bond that there is in history between East and West. It's time to retrace the long history of the Silk Road active between the 1st century before Christ and the 14th century. We rediscover an Euro-Asian continent that in the first millennium and beyond has been deeply globalized and interconnected, even from the cultural point of view. The Silk Road relaunches centuries of history of political and commercial relations. That is why it requires great attention today. We must also to be aware that the Western culture has learned so much from the great Chinese culture and wisdom that arrived in Europe thanks to the study and passion of the Jesuits after the Silk Road was interrupted. Just an example of them. The Sicilian Jesuit Prospero Intorcetta, 1625-1696, a great scholar and translator of Confucius. President Xi quoted Prospero Intorcetta when he met here in Beijing our president, the president of Italian Republic, Mattarella. And again, he quoted Intorcetta when he wrote an article for Corriere della Sera, which is the main Italian newspaper. He quoted actually two Jesuits in his article, Prospero Intorcetta and Martino Martini. Philosophers like Leibniz have taken advantage of this lesson. Leibniz acknowledged its step to China, and from there comes all the following scientific and mathematical thought. Giovanni Battista Vico, 1668-1744, who attended the Jesuit school in Naples and established the first study center on China there, was influenced by China in seeing the centrality of history and the philosophy of history, concepts that would later influence Hegel and therefore Marx and also the contemporary world. Even David Hume's gnoseological revolution of empiricism probably came from a Jesuit, Father Ippolito Desideri, a Jesuit missionary who was the first to translate and to introduce the Buddhist canon in Europe. The link to Buddhism comes through the Jesuit scholars at the Royal College of La Flèche, where Hume went to study. In particular, Father Charles-François Dolu, a friend of Ippolito Desideri, was a Jesuit missionary who lived at the Royal College from 1723 to 1740, overlapping with Hume's stay. The letters of the Jesuit missionaries in China, real reportage at the time of the Enlightenment, were also an opportunity for intellectuals such as Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau to get to know Chinese culture. In spite of their aversion to organized religion, the fascination of the French encyclopedists with all things Chinese, from Voltaire highly praised in the Dictionnaire philosophique of 1764, was based mainly on reports and letters published by the Jesuit missionaries. The French concluded that the Chinese were a highly civilized country. Some influential missionaries, such as Alessandro Valignano, even thought that Chinese society was in some respects even more advanced than Christian Europe. So thanks to the Jesuits, Chinese culture affects thought and taste in a profound way in the great European culture. We could say that the Jesuits were pioneers in the Sinaicization of the West. This is what I read yesterday visiting with Brendan the observatory. So I read in a plate. Jesuits, I've just copy-pasted what I read. Jesuits missionaries were among the first to travel to China, bringing with them the astronomical knowledge of the West. At the same time, they also took Eastern culture and knowledge back to Europe. Perfect. This is the perfect definition of what I said before. We all should browse, at least browse, the 8 volumes of Asia in the Making of Europe, written by Donald Latch and published by Chicago University. We would be able to see how many Jesuits have been involved in the making of Europe, considering the heritage of China. Unfortunately, European colonialism between 19th and 20th centuries imposed a Eurocentric vision. Unfortunately, the Opium Wars have made Christianity appear to the Chinese population as a foreign religion, that of the colonists. But I want to remind you here the Belgian Jesuit Father Frederick Vincent Labbe, a Belgian Jesuit whose image is in the North Cathedral, the North Church, how do you call it? And I saw this morning. Father Labbe chose to become a Chinese citizen at the time when Westerners enjoyed legal privileges in China, including immunity from Chinese law. This is very important. So he became Chinese citizen, even if he could have enjoyed the immunity from Chinese law. So he decided to become Chinese during time of troubles. And so it shows the love he had for China. Pope Francis has clearly contradicted many times the colonial vision. Let us remember that at the end of his trip to Myanmar and Bangladesh, he spoke explicitly about the new role that China is playing in the international context. He said, quote, this is Pope Francis, "China today is a world power. If we see it from this side, it can change the landscape." For me, these words are very important because they show how he sees the world and how can you see the world from different perspectives. The change of landscape evoked by Pope Francis summarizes the reflections that we have made so far. And it is in this panorama, in this landscape, that the provisional agreement of September the 22nd was signed between China and the Holy See. So we must place the signing of this agreement inside of this change of landscape, change of panorama. Considering the big picture, I want to talk with you about two big challenges now. And the first one, the message of the One Belt and Road Initiative. For being aware of this change of landscape and for taking advantage of it, we must remember of the Silk Road, along which an extraordinary meeting of different religious traditions took place. Christians, Muslims, Zoroastrians, and Buddhists met and lived side by side. Precisely in this pluralistic environment, Christianity was willing to enter into a faithful dialogue with cultural and religious traditions very different from the Jewish and Greek Hellenistic ones, with which it was confronted at its beginning. Christianity in the Tang era along the Silk Road remained faithful to the Gospel, fully assuming the Buddhist and Taoist vocabulary, becoming without fear and hesitation fully Chinese many centuries before Matteo Ricci. Thanks to the September 22nd Provisional Agreement, the old links are reconnected in a more harmonious way. The confidence is that we will proceed as we ride a bike, at the right speed that makes you stand and allows, without skidding, to move forward and not to stop. All this considered, we must now look ahead and consider how the Chinese initiative cannot be assessed solely for its economic and financial importance. That would be very short-sighted. Beijing places great emphasis on cultural exchanges between the peoples of the Euro-Afro-Asian ecumene. And it does so by investing resources in countless initiatives dedicated to intangible cultural heritage, museums, fairs, exhibitions. Culture is fundamental to China's strategy for ensuring its international influence. We are certainly experiencing the overcoming of Western modernity and a change of mentality in both the East and the West. Historians wonder if we are experiencing the end of 500 years of Western dominance. The debate reflects the dilemma of a Western society that feels the future of the world less and less in its hands. The presence of other major players on the international scene, like India, Japan, Brazil, Russia, makes the picture very complex and requires global governance. In this respect, Europe must find its own coherent profile. And then, let's not forget subjects such as multinational and transnational corporations and non-governmental bodies. It is not thinkable an East that emerges and submerges the West, nor is it possible to imagine an East or a West in which there is a unique center with respect to so many peripheries. The geopolitical gaze that Pope Francis has been carrying on since the beginning of his pontificate insists on reversing the sclerotic scheme of relations between a center and its peripheries. He doesn't like the sphere for understanding the global relationships. He likes the polyhedron, which has many faces and different distances. He doesn't like at all the image of the sphere. So in the sphere there is a center and there are peripheries. In a polyhedron there isn't a center and there aren't peripheries. And we even can say that every single peripheries are center in itself, in themselves. In their new global order, the Church travels in an open ocean. In particular, Pope Francis feels called to intervene to speak with everyone, to seek dialogue with Muslims, as happened at the great theological University of Al-Azhar in Cairo, Egypt, or with the Buddhist monks in Yangon, Burma. Muslims and Buddhists, for so long enemies of the Church, are now meeting in the common need to curb and stop the tensions that accumulate in the world. In addition, it seeks to heal the wounds inside the Christian world with Protestants and Orthodox. The Pope Francis, feels the need to remove the screen of using religions to justify the battle of interests. They are efforts, those made by Francis, without certain results, but dictated by the urgency of contributing as much as possible to rethinking the world. China is looking for its own way, considering its relationship with India, Russia, Europe, the African countries, those of Latin America and the United States themselves, in their search for a new role. Just an example. Along the Silk Road are the Arab countries. The Turkish conquest of Istanbul in 1453 and the establishment of the Ottoman Empire, Turkish Empire, were among the causes that interrupted the Silk Road. Today, that fracture between West and East needs to be reabsorbed, and China and the United Arab Emirates have already signed agreements that intertwine the two worlds. So now there is an agreement between China and the Emirates, so the Muslim world. So there is a bridge. There is a bridge there. There was a fracture. Let us not forget, in this sense, that the other event with a strong geopolitical impact of Francis, in addition to the Chinese one, is the document of a human brotherhood signed in Abu Dhabi with the Imam of Al-Azhar that I mentioned before. It is not difficult to understand that peace in the world passes through China, but also to Islam in the Middle East. Two major priorities of the pontificate of Francis, who has equipped himself with a needle and a reel of resistant thread. Another the second one, the last one I want to quote, of the many challenges, of course. The second challenge, big challenge for me, the most interesting for myself, for my vision and for my studies, is the Sinicization of Christianity. So it's what we call the inculturation of the church in China. As China has its own characteristics, the Catholic Chinese church is called to be fully Catholic and fully Chinese, so as to inculturate its teachings and the values of the gospel. Taking on Chinese characteristics means an in-depth approach to the process of inculturation, or a better understanding of the process of inculturation. Cardinal Parolin, who is the Secretary of State of the Holy See, said to Global Times, "Catholicism, by its nature, is a global reality, able to bolster the value of belonging to a specific culture and at the same time experience universal fraternity." So he concluded, quote, "The principal actors in this commitment are Chinese Catholics, called to live reconciliation in order to be authentically Chinese and fully Catholic." End of quote. We have always to remind that in order to bridge cultural divides, the missionaries, of many different orders, so we shouldn't talk just about the Jesuits, but they Sinicize themselves, transcending their nationalities. In an article published by China Daily on November 25th, 2017, just the day before Pope Francis left Rome for his trip to Myanmar and Bangladesh, we read, Jesuits, quote, "Jesuits who arrived in China to preach the gospel between the 16th and 19th centuries left an indelible mark on the country, and it was there that they spent the rest of their natural lives." End of quote. In the same article, Zhang Xiping, a professor of Beijing Foreign Studies University, probably you know him, who has spent most of his academic life researching the cultural exchanges between China and the West, said about the Jesuits in the same article. From the very beginning, they realized that in recruiting in the name of God, they had to be very flexible to become all things to all, to use the words of Loyola, Saint Ignatius of Loyola himself. This is what Professor Zhang said. The Church can dialogue with Chinese cultures and traditions, with its rich history of art, music, literature, and poetry. President Xi, in his address to UNESCO in 2014, praised the role of religions in the life of the country. He said, quote, "During the last 2,000 years, religions like Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity have been introduced to China, feeding the country's music, painting, and literature." A reflection on the past can be useful here. We recall that for Christianity it was essential to embrace its own global mission beyond its original experience and Jewish culture, and to immerse itself into Greek culture. This had a strong influence on the development of the life and mission of the Church, even managing to transform the world of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was not the only culture shaped by the Greeks. Aristotle and Plato influenced all the culture that went from Rome to the foothills of the then unsurmountable Himalayas. Christianity is thought of in Greek concept. This is our way of thinking the message of Jesus Christ and the gospel through Greek categories. Christians can first observe that their presence in China dates back much earlier than most people think. The Church of the so-called Church of the East, often called Nestorian Church, which is not proper, but by the way, we use the term Church of the East, led by Syriac monks, were present already in the 6th century of our era, so many centuries before Matteo Ricci and even Montecorvino, the Franciscan bishop. The so-called Nestorians had to cooperate with Buddhists and Taoist monks in order to provide for adequate translations and expressions of their Christian creed. So the dialogue went both ways. Nestorian apologetics had been influenced by Taoist and Buddhist, the Taoist and Buddhist vocabulary as well. But reciprocally, the Nestorian missionaries probably influenced the writings of some Taoist masters. So there was a reciprocal friendship and dialogue and understanding. So they shared a language, they shared concepts, way to express their vision and even their faith. And that was among monks. What would it mean to think of Christianity in Chinese concepts today? To reflect on this theme, it might be useful to consider what then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, then Pope Benedict XVI, wrote in the preface of the Chinese translation of his book interview, Salt of the Earth. He wrote, quote, "The true question is, can the Christian faith be a long-lasting response lived not only by a minority of the Chinese, but also become a force that shapes all of China? Will there one day be an Asian or Chinese Christianity, just as Greek and Latin Christianity appeared as a result of the translation from Judaism to paganism? Or, as in the late classical period, a Germanic, Slavic, and European Christianity? Today the world is no longer just Hellenic, Greek, or the exclusive son of Plato or Aristotle, but it is not the son of another specific culture either. Rightly, the various parts of the world rediscover their basic values and want to take them all over the world. So for the Church and for anyone with global inspirations, the discourse is much more complicated than it was 2,000 years ago. It is no longer enough to be Greek to be universal. You have to become African or Latin American or Chinese, and at the same time citizen of the world, which is composed of many different elements. This is a big challenge, it's a huge challenge. It is right for the Church to be radically Sinicized. However, this Sinicization must be truly capable of enriching the global Church. It is right that China values its culture, but not at the cost of excluding the culture of others, as President Xi said. Vice versa, it is right that the Chinese Church be fully in communion with the universal Church, but not at the cost of losing its authentic and full expression in the very essence of Chinese culture. Without this solid groundness, its contribution will certainly be diluted. In other words, China must embrace the world, but without losing its origins. The work the Church and China can do together, both in China and at the global level, is huge. The Church today, as 400 years ago, has no political or ideological agendas, but the good of the world, of China and of the Church. Moreover, the Church has experience and determination to take this path, as the work she did for centuries ago shows. It is clear that no religion can become a mere instrument of the political apparatus. It is equally true that the content of the tasks that the government asks religious organizations and believers to actuate is far from being defined. In a changing context, there is perhaps space for encounter and imagination. I would like to use an image used by President Xi in his speech on Dialogue of Asian Civilization, where he asked to be broad-minded about cultural exchanges. He said, quote, "We need to stay open and inclusive and draw on each other's strength. All living organisms in the human body must renew themselves through metabolism. Otherwise, life would come to an end." So he uses the image of metabolism, which is a profound inclusion, vital inclusion. So the other becomes part of yourself, and you are open to the other. So it becomes staying together, becomes the same life. In the recent interview to Global Times, Cardinal Parolin explained what increases this kind of metabolism. This is trust. And for me, trust is the pillar of the dialogue. It's impossible to dialogue with others without trust. and trust has to be improved. He said in this interview, Cardinal Parolin, quote, "There are elements which demonstrate an increased trust between the two sides. We are inaugurating a method which appears positive and which will still have to be developed over time, but which for now give us hope that we can gradually arrive at concrete results. We have to journey together, because only in this way will we be able to heal the wounds and misunderstandings of the past, in order to show the world that even starting from positions that are far apart, we can reach fruitful agreements." It's a journey. This is another beautiful image, a journey. So the question for me is how to build trust. And it's not a one-day job. I mean, we need time. We need time. The path of the churches in China is converging towards a single track. But it is a question of building a new balance, which at the beginning could be very, very unstable, kind of a earthquake. We must go forward. This is my message. We must go forward, even if we sometimes could experience kind of a earthquake. It's a way, trust is a way more than a goal. A way that is aware how unity prevails over conflict. The process of change should not be blocked in destructive and unsurmountable conflicts. Pope Francis, without doubt, feels empathy toward the Chinese, an empathy that can put into motion a dynamic, a metabolism, which leads forward, encounter by encounter. Pope Francis loves to say, time is superior to space. Time is superior to space. When you think in terms of space, you think in terms of conquest. How can I prevail? How can I conquer the space of the other? When you think in terms of time, you think in terms of processes, and trust is a process. So time is superior to space. That is, it's important to put in practice processes of dialogue and encounter, realistically and passionately, always animated by the trust and hope of being able to go further. This is a matter of writing a new page of the history of the world. Thank you.
We have a few minutes for questions. I know we had asked folks to write them down in advance, but we didn't receive any. I hope that doesn't mean that none of you have any questions. But we do have some time for questions from the floor if anyone has a question they'd like to pose to Father Spadaro. Wendy.
It's my honor to listen to your lecture. And first of all, I'm very interested when you mentioned the oval heart, one belt, one road. Okay. Do you think this will influence the Christianity nowadays, or do you think it will bring actually a more chance for Christianity to develop in China and along the world?
I think both. I mean, I think it's very relevant to understand the Belt and Road Initiative as something that united the world, and we forgot that. So it's a way. The Belt and Road Initiative. I mean, the Silk Road is a road, and we have to remind that. And so we need roads in a time when many nations are building walls. And this is the big challenge of the world at this moment. And Pope Francis spoke many times about, is speaking actually many times, about a kind of a third world war in pieces. So we already experienced 2 world wars. And the third world war for Pope Francis won't be a big war, but lot of many different worlds in different places in the world. And so we are experiencing the walls. We need to experience the road. And for what we know, the Silk Road was a way for helping people and different religions and cultures to get together. And they have been influenced by one. So there was a deep influence on, for example, of the Buddhism and Taoism on Christianity, but also the meeting of Muslims and Zoroastrian in the Christian vision, because the people were traveling along the road. So they start to meet each other, to dialogue with each other, to try to find even a common language, as I mentioned before. So this is very relevant. At the same time, this is very relevant for, it's kind of a method, so how the Christianity can reach China. We have, it has to be clear that Christianity is not a Western civilization. It's a message for the world. And so we have been used since the Hellenistic period to think Christianity in Greek categories. You know, even the Romans conquered the Greece, but the Greeks conquered the Romans with their ideas. And so the Romans, which were very simple people, start to think with Greek categories. So of course the Christianity is spread out in the world, even to Himalaya, in Greek categories. So in a sense, the image of the Silk Road could enable us to be more open to dialogue. And this is a religion, this is a challenge for religions, but also for cultures and for countries and for politics. What Pope Francis is trying to do is to incarnate the message of Christ even in the geopolitical dynamics. And so visiting countries, he prefers to visit, he visited many non-Christian countries where Christians are 0.3%, 0.1%. So in a sense, he knows that there are a lot of countries who are Christians, which is absolutely fine, but he needs to dialogue with other cultures, other countries, accepting all the big challenges we are living in this world. So for me, this is the big message that the Silk Road could convey, and we should insist on. So the spiritual message of the road, not just the economical, political meaning of the road itself.
Welcome, Father Spadaro, on
Thank
your
you.
first visit to mainland China. This is very exciting. I wonder if you're experiencing on this first visit a greater need for a presence, particularly maybe a Jesuit presence in mainland China to understand more deeply the interiority of the Chinese people, of the church in China. How are you feeling in response to this first experience?
Thank you for the question. I'll let you know in some days. Okay. I'm still digesting my experience. Well, what I'm feeling, I'm learning. Definitely. I don't know. I'm nothing to teach at the moment. I'm just like open here, open eyes, wide open to reality and the places I visited, the people I listen, and I even learning too fast and too much. So I need to stop a little bit and to meditate. I feel there is something, the greatness of this place and culture. I know that I have my categories in understanding reality, and these categories are challenged by what I experienced here in these few days. So I need to come back. Good news for me, I don't know for you. But I need to come back. But this is the experience I'm doing, listening, learning.
Last question, Howard.
Hi, Mr. Tony. I'm Howard. I learned a lot from your lecture. You just mentioned in lecture the Lebanese, and I'm also very interested because I've been teaching TBC for almost over 20 years. So I'm very interested in the difference or common or relation between Chinese culture and Western culture. Is it true that it's said that Leibniz was
Leibniz. Yes, the philosopher.
Inspired to create the binary code, which is IT technology, by reading the book of changes of IG. So if you know anything,
I'm not a specialist of Leibniz, but I just listed some cases where the influence was pretty deep and recognizable. So I'm not an expert on that, so I don't want to answer to the specific question because I'm not an expert. But it's interesting how the Chinese culture became a milieu, and the influence was much deeper than we even, I don't know you, but certainly the Western people are aware of. I think there is something to dig down for understanding how a completely different culture could have an impact on another culture. And it's interesting that the mediation, so the translation, was made by Jesuits, which means spiritual person. So spirituality is something that can, it's like, it's also very interesting that the monks, the Nestorians and the Taoists, try to find a common language and to help each other in expressing concepts. So religion and spirituality could be a bridge in which different culture could walk together, meeting each other. So we very often think of religion as a matter of division, but the lesson we are learning from the Chinese Jesuit missionaries is that religions and spiritualities can be the place for an encounter, not for a division. And you know very well that religion is used now today in the time being as a matter of division, So even the message of the agreement is very important because, there are the so-called underground and open communities inside of the same church. So the message of the agreement is that there is one church, and even if there are different sensitivities, and this is a big message. So I'm sorry I'm not able to answer to your question, but I took the advantage of your question for explaining better this.
Well, this is,
Yeah, please, yes, sure. Parla italiano, io sono felice. Le posso rispondere in italiano. Ma lui
tradurre la domanda agli ascoltatori.
Lo fa lui. Lui è conosce.
No, il suo nome.
Allora parla cinese, va bene.
大家都知道，中梵签订了主教任命协议。正像教主说的，这是双方对话和互相理解的、互相信任的一个成果。
Questo è frutto di fiducia, questo accordo.
很多天主教学者呢，都赞扬教宗的开放态度、对话的态度。
Tanti studiosi cinesi lodano l'atteggiamento di Papa.
但是我觉得呢，对中方的官方的开放的态度，肯定都不够。
Cioè questa affermare l'apertura della parte cinese non è sufficiente, cioè come
无论是中国媒体还是国外的媒体，
dalla
只是
media
赞
mass
扬
media.
梵蒂冈的开放态度，不怎么赞扬中方的。
Cioè ha parlato tanto della questa
Questo
apertura
sì.
del Vaticano, ma non ha parlato sufficientemente su come la Cina è molto aperta in questo
但
aspetto.
是这个协议刚签订不久，去年9月份，9月底以前，在北京我们开了一个小型的研讨会，不到10个学者参加了。
Abbiamo fatto una conferenza prima di settembre, prima di questo accordo, un gruppetto di noi, meno di 10.
大家在会上呢一致认为呢，这个协议是一个历史性的协议，
Cioè noi studiosi abbiamo detto che questo è un accordo storico.
是这个中国官方的天主教政策的一个根本性的转折。
Questo è un cambiamento dell'atteggiamento politico del governo
为什么
cinese.
要这么说呢？
Perché
因为大
diciamo
家
questo?
都知道，过去中方官方的态度是任命主教是中国的主权，
Nel passato questo è come per il governo cinese il nome di vescovi è sotto la giurisdizione dei Cina.
现在既然签订了这个协议，承认教宗有任命主教的权利，
Invece adesso il governo cinese ha ammesso che la nomina viene da
那我就
Papa.
想请教授回答一下，你是怎么评价中方的这个开放的态度？这个是不是一个重大的转折？是不是抛弃了过去的老的那个天主教政策？谢谢。
Quindi se lei può fare un commento su questo, c'è un cambiamento di policy anche da parte del Vaticano? O
In che lingua, which language? Italiano e cinese. Tutti capiscono inglese. Ah, ma lei ha fatto la domanda. Forse l'ultima la facciamo in italiano. The last one in Italian. Okay. So you can translate into Chinese.
最后一个回答用意大利语。
questo è stato veramente in this way you can listen the language, the Italian language. You can enjoy the Italian language, which is the language of Pope Francis also.
这是很美丽的意大利语，很美丽，也是教宗的
As a
经常
Bishop
用
of
的
Rome.
语言。
La ringrazio molto di questa domanda, di questa considerazione.
非常感谢你所说的，你提出来这个问题。
Perché è una considerazione fondamentale.
就这个考虑是很基本的。
Ma io non sono nessuno per parlare al nome della Cina.
我当然不能够代表中国去说什么话。
Io parlo umilmente dalla parte romana.
所以我只能够很谦虚的讲罗马的看法。
E descrivo quello che vedo.
就我尝试去描述我所看到的。
E per quello che io posso percepire,
我所理解的。
questo è un accordo veramente storico.
没错，这个是一个历史性的协议。
Per almeno due motivi.
有两个原因。
Il primo, e lei lo ha già detto, è il riconoscimento del Papa e dell'azione del Papa nella nomina dei vescovi.
第一个原因就是你也刚刚也说过了，就是中国政府承认教宗任命主教的权利。
Quindi si riconosce che il Papa ha un'autorità spirituale.
所以教宗有这个灵性上、精神上的一个权威。
E che questa autorità spirituale è benvenuta in Cina.
教宗这个权威也受中国所接纳、所欢迎。
Soprattutto si distingue l'autorità spirituale da quella politica.
所以这个权威呢是区分这个灵性、精神上的权威和政治上的权威。
E questo per me è un grande passo.
为我来说，这个是一个很大的进步。
Ripeto, io non sono nessuno per giudicare la Cina.
我再说，我没有权去判断中国所做的决定。
Però questo è quello che io capisco.
这是我所理解的。
Ma se sbaglio, ditemelo.
如果我说错了，你们也可以提出来。
La seconda cosa per cui l'accordo è storico
那第二个原因，为什么这个是一个历史性的协议？
è che fino adesso il governo cinese, sia gli imperatori sia il governo della Repubblica,
到现在由那个皇帝时代到今天的中国政府，一贯的
si sono sempre relazionati per esempio ai gesuiti o comunque ai religiosi, per esempio ricordiamo appunto Matteo Ricci, come letterati, studiosi, funzionari.
就是说历史上他们对待那些传教士啊、宗教人士啊，都是以他们的作为文化的使者这样的身份去接受的。
In questo accordo la relazione è chiaramente di tipo spirituale e pastorale.
而现在这个协议就是已经跨越到这个宗教还有那个精神上的、灵性上的这样的考虑。
E questo non è mai avvenuto, mi sembra, nella storia.
这个在历史上没有发生过的。
E questo è storico.
所以这个是历史性的。
Cioè noi stiamo vivendo una pagina di storia nuova.
我们现在活着一个历史上新的一页。
Che questo porti o porterà a qualche terremoto non è una sorpresa.
如果这个会带来一些动荡啊、地震啊，也不是奇怪的事情。
Ma questo fa parte della storicità di questo accordo.
这个就是因为就是这个是一个历史性的。
E per questo bisogna andare avanti.
所以要向前走。
Grazie. Grazie.
Well, as Father Spadaro has told us, this is the beginning of a first step, perhaps, on a path forward, a path of friendship and growing in trust. So at this time, if you'll join me in thanking him, and then after that, Father Spadaro will be available for some informal conversation if you have further questions or anything like that. But let us thank him for the.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.